Hi, friends, and welcome to the season finale of season 3 of Your Bish Therapist. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Here we are at the end of season 3. For those who didn't hear my announcement, I just need to take a little breaky break. My body's tired, but fear not. I will be back in January, number 1. And number 2, if you want to hear podcasts on my breaks, please head over to my Spreaker Supporters Club and you can check that out. Link is in the podcast description wherever you pressed play to listen to this podcast. So please check that out if you want to hear me during breaks. And if not, look forward to seeing you in January. Today's episode is going to be a banger. It is going to be the season finale, Anatomy of Lies. Anatomy of Lies is a 3-part docuseries on Peacock about a woman named Elizabeth Finch, who was a TV writer on Grey's Anatomy. She also happened to have a million major traumas happen to her, which come to find out were actually false. So what I'm going to do today, this is going to be a signature deep dive. I watched the 3-part docuseries not once, but twice. Yes, because the first time I watched it, I wanted to soak in all the information. And then the second time I watched it, I wanted to get specifics, get quotes, etc. I also researched an article called Where is Grey's Anatomy Writer Elizabeth Finch Now? Published on October 16th, 2024 by Katie Mannion. Talks a lot about her anatomy of lies, her hoaxes, her pathological lying. There was one article that Elizabeth Finch spoke publicly and admitted to her lies. It was to the Ankler, Ankler. All of these articles can be found online, especially the Ankler article. It is extremely lengthy. I went to print it out and it was like 30 pages and I was like, nah. But I'm going to basically tell you everything that you need to know about all of this. So if you haven't watched it, don't worry. You don't need to. If you have watched it and you want to know what is this woman's deal, I'm happy to tell you. For those of you who are newer to the podcast and maybe don't know, I am a 2-time cancer survivor. I had ovarian cancer when I was 17. That was actually supposed to be a terminal cancer. The doctor said that I would likely not survive. They would do everything that they could. This was in 1998, where end-stage ovarian cancer was a death sentence. And they said, we're going to do surgeries, had hysterectomies, lots of chemotherapy. April 6th of 1999, I was in remission, which is and was at the time miraculous. And then in 2015, I was diagnosed with a chronic cancer, which I now will have for the rest of my life. And so the reason why I'm mentioning this is that, number one, whenever people use cancer to garner attention, it enrages me for multiple reasons, because I feel like what people will tell you with real cancer is that there's not a lot of attention. Like when I was 17 and I had ovarian cancer, there was no fault in our stars. There were no people driving by my house honking, and there were no people, cheering me on. And there was none of that. There were people who didn't know what to say to me. They were allergic to me. They acted like cancer was contagious, and that's how I was treated. And, with this chronic cancer, people understandably have a hard time understanding it. And so admittedly, one of the things that irritates me the most about this whole story is that what she's lying about is very similar to what I actually experience. And so the positive end of this is that I can read her for filth in a way that most other people can't, because I am a 2-time cancer survivor and I know the ins and the outs of it. So, I'm going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about what is going on here. I'm not going to diagnose her, but I am going to outline some diagnoses that can match with some of the information that Elizabeth Finch is presenting with. We're going to mention it all as one of my favorite Bethany sayings. You hear me say it all the time. So let's just get into it. I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of information about Elizabeth Finch, her origin story, because for me, what's most interesting is whenever somebody, fakes cancer or does fakes, she faked a lot of things. It wasn't just cancer, by the way. If it was just cancer, that would be bad enough in and of itself, but it was so many things. So I'm going to outline everything that she lied about. I'm going to give you an origin story that kind of tells us maybe where some of this started, because with personalities like this, there are origins to that, in addition to maybe some biological issues that I believe have been present since birth. So I'm going to explain all of that. Elizabeth Finch was born and raised in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, in March of 1978. She was raised by her biological parents and older brother, Eric. In Cherry Hill, so she went to high school in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. She got noticed after writing a play called Daddy's Home about a girl who is abused by her father. Okay, this is so important. It won statewide play competitions, and the theater elites loved her. Okay. This was her first taste of, I can write something about abuse, about something awful. It doesn't have to necessarily be about me, but look at all this attention that I'm garnering from this success, because it's exactly what happened. She won all these competitions. She was regarded as the it girl. And so I also believe that this was a pivotal moment for her. She interviewed to be Shonda Rhimes' assistant on Grey's Anatomy when Grey's first aired on TV. She tried a few times, she wrote a sample script, and she was not hired. And what was talked about in this docuseries is that she was a very good writer. So Elizabeth Finch was a really good writer. But the problem is, in LA, being a writer is very competitive, and you can't just be good. There has to be something else with it, because there's a good writers there are a dime a dozen. And she felt like she had to be different. She felt like she had to be special. And I believe somewhere in here, her brain started to form. It started to shuck and jive in terms of, okay, well, how do I get ahead? And how do I get on the show that I desperately love? Back to the timeline. In 2002, she went to grad school at USC for playwriting and switched to screen and TV writing. In 2007, according to Finch, she suffered a hiking injury, which required knee replacement surgery. This was in 2007. She recalled her loved ones being so supportive, leading up to the different procedures she had to undergo, until it became dead quiet. She says, I had no support and went back to my old maladaptive coping mechanism. I lied and made something up because I needed support and attention, and that's the way I went after it. That's where that lie started, in that silence. So according to the Ankler interview that she did, she cites this 2007 accidental hiking injury, which required knee replacement surgery, as the precipice of her pathological lying career. Okay. And she claims that people were supportive, but then all of a sudden that support went away, which is like, yeah, that's how it goes. My cheering section used to be giant, and it is currently very tiny, because the fact of the matter is that people don't owe us anything, and true support is rare to find in this world, I believe. True, authentic love and support. And so I think, in my mind, she feels, well, I really liked this. This was really good for me. And how do I get more of this? It's almost like there's a flavor of addiction here, where it's like, well, let me get my needs met, but I'm not going to meet them myself as an adult woman. I am going to make up lie after lie after lie to garner all this attention with other people, right? So that's important to note, that this is not a leap that most with healthy psychological underpinnings would choose. Okay. In 2008, she graduated from her program and worked as an assistant on True Blood. She, in fact, got promoted after another writer got fired. In 2012, when Finch's career hit another high with a 2-year writing stint on the Vampire Diaries, that same year, she began telling family members, friends, and colleagues that she had been diagnosed with a terminal cancer called chondrosarcoma. Chondrosarcoma is a rare form of bone cancer, and she told friends and family that she had to undergo chemotherapy immediately. Eventually, she penned a since-deleted essay for Elle about her cancer experience. Okay, so we start to see here how these small things start piling and adding up. And now she's saying that she has chondrosarcoma. Okay, so her Elle article caught the attention of an executive at Shondaland, the company founded by Grey's Anatomy creator Shonda Rhimes. Rhimes was reportedly impressed by the writer, Elizabeth Finch, and offered her a writing position on the show. Okay, so here what she's learning is that I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get ahead, because you can't just be a writer and get these opportunities. You have to be shrewd. You have to be ruthless. You have to, make stuff up, I guess. And guess what? It worked. And I believe because this worked, the only show she ever wanted to write on was Grey's Anatomy. She said after interviewing or submitting a writing sample and she was denied from being a writer on the show, she became obsessed with the show. She became a dictionary of this show. And so eventually, being obsessed with this show and now having her, for quote unquote, cancer story be out there, it opened a door for her that I think felt intoxicating. It didn't take long for Finch's real-life medical experiences to make its way onto the show. In season 15, Dr. Catherine Avery, played by Debbie Allen, was diagnosed with the same type of bone cancer as Finch, who wrote the storyline. So what we started to see happen is she was becoming what I'm going to call a grief tourist. What is a grief tourist? Happy to explain. So in the cancer community, and yes, there's a large community of us, all different types of people, but it's a huge community nonetheless. And there are a lot of cancer podcasts, cancer pages. I follow many of them myself. And specifically, Elizabeth Finch went on a podcast called the Stupid Cancer Show podcast, which, by the way, before doing what I'm doing now, I interviewed to be, it was for a company called Stupid Cancer. And I was interviewing to be a therapist to provide psychoeducational information to cancer patients and caregivers. I not only I was overqualified in terms of my credentials, and I was very open about my 2 experiences with cancer. And I said, I'm a professional and I'm a patient, and I understand this upside down, inside out, right, left, and center. And I didn't even get past the screening. So I guess what I'm saying is I just felt their loss, and everyone who's listening here, it's your gain. Because if I had gotten that job, I certainly wouldn't have pursued this. So I think at the end of the day, we all get to where we need to go. At the time, it didn't make a lot of sense. But what I'm saying is that there were legitimate cancer podcasts, shows. She interviewed with the American Psychological Association. And it's just so wild seeing this on Peacock, looking back and seeing, wow, she fooled everyone, but also everyone participated in the trickery because they wanted to attach themselves to this person who could garner them attention and clicks. And, they thought Elizabeth would be good for the brand. And oof, that's a rough look. Also, the funny thing is when she went on the Stupid Cancer Show podcast, there were some quotes in here that I wrote down because there were times where she gave herself away. And by the way, all pathological liars, which I do believe she is a pathological liar, and I will explain, there's like like an addictive component to it where it's like it starts out small and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And when she went on the Stupid Cancer Show podcast, she said, and I quote, "There's a difference between being secretive and being a liar. I pride myself on not being a liar." Okay. I need you to remember these words. So regarding the cancer stuff, I'm going to go in a minute about some of the complexities here of this scam and how deep and significant it became. So as I mentioned, she claimed that this cancer was terminal. In 2014, she wrote that article in Elle magazine, which has since been removed from the internet. And then that article got the attention of Friday Night Lights cast because she was like a huge Friday Night Lights person. And by the way, I have never seen one episode of Grey's Anatomy or Friday Night Lights. And honestly, after this, I couldn't be happier. I've never seen one single solitary episode. And at this point with Grey's Anatomy, I never knew why I didn't get into it. I just didn't. And maybe my soul just sensed the ickery that's going on. I have no idea, but I just never got into it. So I guess Friday Night Lights, they would hold up this sign that said state to show support for Elizabeth Finch. And so all over social media, people were holding up state for her, state, state, state. And then the star of the show, Kyle Chandler, he held up his little paper with the word state on it, which was just their rally cry, right? It was their rally cry. It was a sign of love, adoration, and support. And so, they break the internet at the time by having him hold this up. June 2019, she claimed that her terminal cancer was in remission, which, by the way, so other than my story of that happening, I have literally never heard of it before. Terminal cancer is different from chronic cancer. Okay. So let me be clear about a couple of red flags here because I need to explain something. Terminal and chronic cancer are two different things. So initially she claimed her cancer was terminal, then it was chronic. And then she needed to pivot because she wasn't going to die. And writers saw her living with cancer and she claimed that she was in remission. So other than my story, I have never heard of something like this happening before. Number one, I was in a medical book. For real. My case was written about because it was miraculous and it was odd and it was confusing. And let me tell you is that, so not only did she claim she no longer had cancer, that it miraculously went away, she also claimed December of 2019 that she had kidney issues as a result of chemotherapy, which, by the way, I mean, that happens to people. My body is a nightmare because chemotherapy, it created all of these chronic long-term issues for me. And so she claimed one wasn't functioning due to chemotherapy and that she needed a kidney transplant as a result. She claimed she participated in a clinical trial of 13 people and she's the only survivor. So let me be clear about a couple of red flags here. Number one, terminal and chronic cancer are two different things and they don't switch. So, for example, I survived a cancer that they thought was going to kill me. It was end-stage ovarian cancer, stage 3C. However, once I was in remission, I was in remission. It was gone and I passed all of the, 5-year, 10-year, all of those major milestones that make a cancer survivor feel safe from having a relapse or reoccurrence. Okay. If this woman participated in a clinical trial and was the only survivor, let me be clear, she would have been the focus of every publication, journal, research study. This woman would have been in a lab stat getting testing to figure out how is this humanly possible. But the problem is that most people don't have enough experience with truly to understand cancer to know what's bullshit and what's not. They interviewed several people who I'm going to talk about in just a moment, friends, her ex-wife, and early on, she had dear friends who came to help her when she was claiming to getting her her to getting treatments at the Mayo Clinic. She didn't want the friends to come inside the hospital and wanted them to wait in the car. Okay, again, huge red flag. Her cancer fakery is very similar to Brooke's cancer fakery from Real Housewives of OC. There is a difference between wanting privacy and being shady. And so remember when Vicky said how Brooks, she never went to his infusions because he didn't want her there, and she never really went in. So these are things that happen with cancer faking stories, that there are the red flags there. But here's the problem. People are afraid to call them out because cancer is such a sensitive topic. And so what Elizabeth Finch did, which is what Brooks did, they emotionally weaponize a really tough topic, knowing that people aren't going to really A, call them out on it, and B, know enough to call them out on it. So another red flag for me was that, she would wear this head wrap and you would see pictures of her, but she had eyebrow hair. Okay. So let me explain something about chemotherapy hair loss that some people may not understand or even feel comfortable talking about, but I'm here to mention it all. When you lose your hair from chemotherapy, you lose it at the root. You lose every single hair on your body. Yes, let me repeat that. Every single hair. You lose eyebrow hair, hair on your head, pubic hair, armpit hair, leg hair, all of it. Smooth as a baby seal. Okay. So when you see someone wearing a head wrap and they have legit eyebrows, red flag. Now, here's the thing. There is an invention called cold capping. People who can undergo chemotherapy cold cap and keep their hair. This is a newer thing. It was not available when I was growing up. If it had been, clearly I would have chosen that. I was a 17-year-old girl. I would have loved to keep my hair. That was not an option. So cold capping now does allow folks to retain their hair while they're going through chemotherapy. However, when she was showing pictures of herself, you could tell her head was shaved. It wasn't coming out at the root. You can't have it both ways. You can't have oh, well, okay, so you're clearly not cold capping because you literally have a shaved head, but you still have hair in at the root. That just doesn't make any sense. And then a couple of other things that were huge red flags is, when after she quote unquote got diagnosed, she worked long hours and they were telling her that she should take some time off. And her words, hell fucking no. Yeah, I'm going to be rude about it. Hell fucking no, she says. No. Here in the real world, cancer patients don't get an option. You can't just power your way through real awful cancer. And so again, as someone who is doing this podcast, doing what I love, I am being forced to take a break. I have the mind of somebody who is a type A overachiever. I love doing what I do, but I live in the body of a chronic cancer patient who has a lot of other chronic health issues. My body behaves like an elderly sloth most of the time. So for me, I don't get a choice about overworking or, working long hours. I don't get that choice. My body shuts it down for me. So, that is what really bothered me too, because she used this to get people to be like, wow, she's such a hard worker. And it's like, yeah, she is, because she's a faker liar pants. So 2 other things is that she would often come into the writer's room, excuse herself. Her face would be looking green, makeup, and she would take puke breaks in front of people so they could hear her. And she was not throwing up because she was not sick. And then the final thing here is that this really irritated me. She claimed she had a port. I actually had a port, and I do have a port scar. A port is where they cut open a part of your chest wall. It gets sewn into your chest wall. And the reason for that during chemotherapy is that chemotherapy is very toxic. It is legitimately toxic waste. And when it goes into your veins in your arm, it burns. That's not incredibly effective. I had a port for my entire treatment. And as a result, I have a real scar on my chest. So she claimed to have a port. And by the way, where she had just put fake gauze and tape over the area, and I could tell where she had it, it was too high. For someone who's had a real port, where she had the tape, I immediately knew, I'm like, well, that's wrong. And then, of course, she didn't have any scars. Come to find out, she didn't have any scars from her port. She didn't have any kidney transplant scars. She didn't have any scars from anything, quite frankly, because none of it happened. So let me explain to you some of the other grifts and falsehoods that came after Cancergate. After the Me Too movement, she claimed that she was the victim of sexual abuse from a Vampire Diaries director. She declined to name him and wrote an article about it, which was removed from the site in 2022. This is one of the claims that she never publicly retracted. The cancer claim she has publicly retracted. This Me Too claim she has not publicly retracted. However, they've interviewed multiple people who worked with her on the set. Nobody has any idea what she's talking about. And it is very unlikely that a pathological liar happens to be telling the truth about a couple of choice things. That's very unlikely. Then 3, she claimed that during her cancer treatment, the doctors told her that she would not be able to get pregnant. And she miraculously got pregnant, but had to have an abortion because it was either her or the fetus. She did a piece about it. Because all of this stuff, by the way, she got a lot of attention for. She wrote pieces about cancer. She wrote pieces about Me Too, which again, we need to be mindful that victims are to be believed. But this is an instance in terms of people are always going to weaponize victimhood, like true victimhood, which I use as a term because there are real victims out there listening to this that, women don't get believed. Let's be clear. Victims are still to be believed. This woman is not to be believed, but victims are to be believed. Let me be clear about that. So she did a piece, she did a commercial, and she wrote a piece about how this impacted her. Here's the thing that's odd about her. I'm just going to share I noticed some of these things, is that she seemed legitimately pissed about it. And so as I see her talking about all these things publicly and seeing the vigor which she talks about it and the emotion and the drama, I'm going to talk later about what I think that's about, because I think the reason she's very convincing is I think she kind of convinced herself that she was special and she was a victim and she deserved all of this attention and all of that. And so it led her to be a very convincing liar. Then the 4th thing she lied about was in Pittsburgh, there was a Tree of Life Jewish synagogue shooting. It was a tragic terrorist attack on this Jewish synagogue. And she claimed to go here in the past and knew people who had been murdered. She claims, and in my opinion, this is one of the more disgusting things that she did. She claimed it a Jewish law. She had to fly from LA to Pittsburgh to help clean up her friend's brains off the floor due to Jewish law, which claims that someone needed to help collect the remains. She co-opts that too. So now she's co-opted cancer, she's co-opted kidney disease, she's co-opted Me Too, she's co-opted abortion, and now the Tree of Life shooting. There was a woman who was interviewed for this docuseries. Her name is Kylie Donovan. She was a friend of Finch and a writer. This is where I feel Finch took the step from creating her own personal tragedies to becoming a grief tourist and literally becoming an energy vampire, feasting on other people's trauma and grief. A grief tourist is somebody who comes in and out of people's lives, not because they care, to watch, to literally tour somebody's grief, to see what that's like, and then exit without giving them any true support or love or assistance. That is what a grief tourist is. And in the cancer community, we talk a lot about grief tourists. For example, there are people who, when I would post on my personal page about my cancer stuff, there were people who would look, but they would never comment. So you can watch my grief, you can watch me express what's going on, but you can't ever show me any actual support. And so what I will say is that Elizabeth Finch is a grief tourist. She's an energy vampire. She's a pathological liar who feasted on the pain of others to self-promote, to further her career, and to get her attention. So this is where she starts crossing over into becoming a grief tourist. And it's ironic that she worked on the Vampire Diaries because I think she is a vampire, a grief vampire, an energy vampire. She claimed her friend's story, Kylie Donovan, as her own. Kylie shared that her biological father was her mother's rapist, and she was the result of that sexual assault. She didn't process the trauma, and Finch never asked her for permission. But Finch wrote one of the biggest episodes, and this is why this is so crucial. One of the biggest episodes Finch wrote, called Silent All These Years, where one character learns, Jo, that she was conceived by rape. And this was a high-profile episode in the midst of the Me Too era. So again, this is where Elizabeth Finch is great at just being a con artist. She saw the opportunity. She's an evil genius, really. I mean, with an emphasis on evil. She truly is evil, but she is a genius, saying, wow, there's room here for me to take this Me Too stuff. And if I can write a good show about this, I'm going to get all of these accolades. And that's exactly what happened. So the episode dealing with rape, every female member of the crew was invited to stand in scrubs as they walked this character down, Jo, through the corridors of the hospital. Elizabeth Finch claims, they forced me to hold the gurney and my face was in every single promotion. And you can tell as she said it, she was just so gleeful. She got exactly what she wanted. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she got what she wanted, which led to an odd, what I'm going to call obsession with a character, Jo, who was played by a woman named Camilla Luddington. All of a sudden, Elizabeth Finch became the writer for Jo's storyline. She claimed that the writer said, you take it. And the writer said, no, she said that she wanted to take it. And people started to notice there was this preoccupation with Jo and assumed that perhaps it was a crush. Elizabeth Finch claimed that the writers knew that she was in Jo's quote-unquote headspace. Jo's character had all of these dramas that were played out on the show. It was like Elizabeth Finch was like getting to live her real life drama by writing it and then seeing it on the show and seeing how much other people loved it. Like, what an odd... It's so odd. So Jo then had an abusive husband who tried to kill her, sending Jo down a dark path. And this is hugely crucial, where Jo had to go to inpatient mental health treatment. So because Jo on the show had to go to inpatient mental health treatment, guess what happened to Elizabeth Finch? Guys, you wouldn't believe it. She also had to go to inpatient mental health treatment. Isn't that so wild? Ugh. So Finch claims she had a breakdown from the Pittsburgh tragedy, and she went to get treatment for what she called PTSD. Here's what she actually did. She went to be a professional grief tourist, and she went to research her role, ruining other people's lives in the process and completely destroying people's anonymity and co-opting PTSD in the process. So I have complex PTSD. I treated PTSD before I was diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I know a lot about it. And so did Elizabeth Finch. She was smart about how she went along with her grifts. She really researched them. She really knew how to play the part. She ended up going to this center, Sierra Tucson, where she claimed she was getting PTSD treatment, and she checked in under the name Jo. How bizarre is that? How bizarre. One of the people that was interviewed, her name was Jen Beyer. She was a former treatment resident at Sierra Tucson. And she also happened to be a registered nurse and a mother of 5 who was leaving a horrifically abusive relationship with an ex-husband. So Jen Byer is in this facility when Finch comes into the facility. So what happened, in my opinion, from here on out is that Finch, like most addicts, you need more and more and more and more of a substance to get the desired effect. Well, the same is true in this scenario. She needed more drama. She needed more pain. She needed more grief tourism. And she latched herself on like a tick to Jen Byer. Jen, she knew, was coming out of an abusive relationship and was very fragile. And she sucked the drama out of Jen's life like a leech and just made Jen's story her own. So all of a sudden, Finch says that, and by the way, so going back to Jen Byer's situation, it was so serious that she had to live in a safe house due to lingering threats from her abusive ex-husband, who did eventually end his life. He struggled with mental illness. And I say that because 2 things can be true. People can struggle with mental illness and be abusive. Most people with mental illness do not fall under those categories. However, that can happen when people develop certain psychological disorders, paranoia and aggression, and those things can come into play, but it is the exception, not the rule. I just want to be clear about that. And so Finch here attaches herself to Jen like a tick trying to feed. And all of a sudden then Finch, now after hearing Jen's domestic violence story, she began claiming physical abuse from her brother was the root of her PTSD. And by the way, this is another public accusation that she has never retracted. Okay? Never retracted to this day. She then claims that her brother, this person, Eric, who abused her, and that was the result of her PTSD, or the root of her PTSD. She claims her brother shot himself, but did it in a way that was manipulative on his end, saying he was a doctor. He knew how to do it in a way that wouldn't end his life, and it would force her to pull the plug. Holy Moses. And guess what? Her brother Eric is alive and well. He is a doctor living in Florida. He and Finch's parents declined to comment for the documentary. Gee, I wonder why. Because these people are victims of her insanity as well. No, I shouldn't say insanity. Because these people are victims of her as well. So let's move on to after she's in this facility, by the way, which one of the things that I have to mention is that Elizabeth Finch was really good at sensing people's vulnerability and learning to manipulate systems. So in this facility that she was in, she and Jen Byer, were not supposed to be in the same room per rules of the inpatient treatment. And there are reasons for those rules, by the way. So if you're in a processing group with each other, the rule is usually you don't stay in the same room. And again, there are millions of reasons for that. Privacy, confidentiality, and again, it prevents situations like this, prevents people from being able to take advantage of someone's vulnerabilities or their story. And so Finch was such a good manipulator. She manipulated the staff at the treatment facility into allowing her to room with Jen anyway, even though they were in the same process group, which for me, this is pivotal. And here's why this is pivotal and why I'm pointing it out, is that when I worked in inpatient rehab, people tried to manipulate all the time. People would get mad. They would threaten my life, throw chairs, blah, blah, blah. I've had a lot of things happen to me because I refuse to be manipulated. But this is the reason why. Because you can look at someone like Finch and say, oh, well, she's harmless. And let's just break this little rule. If these people at this facility would have kept her in another room, Jen's life may have been different. Now, Jen made her own decisions, right? I believe she was groomed by Finch. I do believe that women can groom for sure. And I believe that Finch did groom Jen, and the treatment facility, because they were not strong on their boundaries, they participated in that. And I think that's really shitty. And this is just a message for people listening who, struggle with boundaries, is that when you're a professional, there's reasons why these rules and regulations are in line. And if someone is always trying to break those rules, that is a red flag. The other rule that Finch was breaking here is that she left to take a work trip, which is a huge violation of policies. Like, going into inpatient treatment, it's not a vacation, it's treatment. And so treatment staff, you're usually not allowed to leave, to go off campus, to take work trips or vacations or what have you. But again, she was able to manipulate and left to take this work trip. So again, what the facility did, because of their lax rules and regulations, or they didn't follow through on them when it came to Finch, Finch was able to be a grief tourist, to be an energy vampire, and then to go back to LA, write about it a little bit, and then go back to treatment to gather more information, which is pretty gross. There's an episode called Breathe Again where Finch says, and I quote, "What we've never seen on Grey's, because it's a surgical show, is trauma. We did a whole ton of research to make sure it was as specific and nuanced as possible, because we were showing a different model of therapy." Okay, so what she's saying here is she did the research by going into this. She told on herself, is what I'm saying. She did the research by going into this treatment facility, by being a grief tourist. And Finch laughs about how amazing it was to take Joe back to square one, which is exactly what happened with Jen. So Jen had a breakdown in therapy. She felt like she was back to square one. And then, wouldn't you know, that's exactly what happened with Joe and on Grey's Anatomy. And the way that Finch talked about it, the way that she laughed about it, it's really diabolical. And also with Jen, they show her eldest daughter and they show her family. And, her daughter had some really interesting things to say about Finch too, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. So let's go back to the timeline here, because that's important. So remember, in March 17th, 2017, she claims that she lost a kidney due to chemo, and then started a rumor that Anna Paquin gave her a kidney, but she hinted that she didn't want anyone to know. This is what the writers who were interviewed for the show had to say. She claimed to have this kidney transplant because she was near death, and that Anna Paquin gave her it was so ridiculous. And then March 2018, they show this pivotal, her 40th birthday, where she is in this room with all of these people who she's like, "I'm just so lucky. You all love me." And here, let me be clear. People at this time thought she had survived a terminal cancer and a kidney transplant, in addition to a host of abuses and losses. So then 2019, she checks into that residential treatment where she does her research. And then at the end of 2019, she and Jen fall in love. Finch knew all the buttons to press with Jen, how she felt unloved. And so what Jen describes is that Finch essentially love bombed her. She knew exactly, Finch is a great manipulator. In fact, if she heard this right now, I'm sure she'd be able to manipulate the hell out of this. Actually, not me though, because I'm the only person in the world who I was raised by the best manipulator on the planet. I cannot be manipulated. So she could try, but she would fail. And so my point is that Jen fell in love with who she thought Finch was. And so Finch realized that she had a way out here. And so at the end of June 2019, she moved to Kansas with Jen, became integrated into their family, became a mother to these 5 kids, and claimed her cancer was in remission. So now all of a sudden she's writing for Grey's, getting even bigger roles than before. She was the default writer for standalone episodes, and she got to come and go as she pleased because she needed time off to manage her health. So literally, for a pathological lying shyster, this is the dream. Your career is booming. You're the default writer. All of your cons have been successful up until this point, and you're exactly where you want to be, stepping on people's backs to get there. Then at the end of September, and her ex ended his life, and this led Jen and Finch to move in together in Kansas, and Finch would go back and forth for work. In November of 2019, there was a pivotal moment regarding the love bombing situation called the Sentinel Awards, where Finch was getting an award, the irony, and she gave a speech calling out Jen directly. And in this, by the way, this speech was claiming that they were champions for not using women, whilst she was literally in the process of using so many women. Calling Jen out at the awards was meant to groom her and make her feel special, which is exactly what happened. And at the end of November, they go back to Kansas and they find out that before her ex died, he completely trashed the home. So Finch raised money, flew in to help take the house back. The community got involved. And here again, more grooming and more what I'm going to call stolen valor. Stolen valor is like when you are claiming you've been deployed, or it's with military, but I use it in ways that are not military as well. It's when people are stealing valor in ways that don't belong to them. And for me, there's nothing settling. There's nothing like emotionally satisfying for me about stolen valor. So I guess what I'm saying is that for someone who feels emotionally satisfied by stolen valor, that definitely tells you a lot about their personality type. So then, December of 2019, Finch proposes to Jen, and life was going good. The kids were starting to flourish. Her son specifically was getting a lot of attention for, he is a wonderful ballet artist, and which, by the way, men in ballet are super important, and there's definitely not enough of them. I loved her son being involved in ballet. I thought that was amazing. I'm also a ballerina. I was my whole life. And so I loved that. But what happened was Jen started to notice that all of a sudden the kids were getting attention, and suddenly Finch claims that she's sick with kidney stones. And they go and she gets checked out, and the doctor tells Jen, by the way, who's a nurse, that her kidneys look fine. And, it's funny because Jen, she made a statement here that, sometimes it's possible to ignore red flags even when they're hitting you in the face. And this is one of those examples. She knew that, her wife claimed that she had a kidney removed or a kidney transplant, and now there's no evidence of that, and both kidneys look healthy, right? So this is where Jen's cognitive dissonance starts to wear away, because the thing is for Jen and why and how victims get taken advantage of is all she really wanted was love. She found this woman who she thought was her knight in shining armor, so to speak, and turns out that she's just victimizing her like her ex-husband. In 2020, Finch and Jen get married. And then it was not until 2022 that things started to fall apart. After this event with the doctor and the kidneys, it didn't take long before Jen began to suspect that some of Finch's stories were untrue, something she confirmed with a bit of social media sleuthing. So essentially, Jen looked on social media, and the show narrates this beautifully. It was like a drama you were watching, but it was her real life. It showed how all of a sudden she started to realize, wait a second, I've had an intimate relationship with this woman, and I never noticed that she didn't have a port scar. She doesn't have one. She doesn't have a scar on her back. She, in fact, doesn't have any scars on her body whatsoever. And so this woman, who has been the victim of all of these awful situations, is now starting to put together that this woman has lied. And she confronts Finch, and eventually Finch is clear with her that, yes, she has lied at every single turn. And it was wild to watch Jen have this realization that she has been sleeping with the enemy. I mean, literally. And by the way, that's a great movie if you haven't seen it. So let me explain what I think is going on here, psychologically speaking. In February 2022, 2 years after exchanging wedding vows, Jen Byer reached out to Shonda Rhimes and Grey's Anatomy showrunner Krista Vernoff to tell them about Finch's lies. By then, the couple, they split in November 2019. By then, they were in the process of a divorce. Because what was happening is between when she realized in 2020 what was happening and 2022, Finch kept saying, I'm going to tell people I got to do it in my own time. Just doing what con artists do. They gaslight, they lie, they manipulate, they do whatever they need to do to evade consequences. But Jen wasn't. Here's the difference. Jen is a good person. So she wasn't going to allow, her kids, society, she wasn't going to allow this to go on. And Finch knew that. Executives at Shondaland and Disney reached out to Jen and started looking into her claims, ultimately discovering that the star writer was indeed lying about a number of things, including having cancer. So initially, Finch took a leave of absence. But then once they realized this, she knew that the writing was on the wall. She was going to get fired. And then she resigned, which is a real housewives move, right? Like Lisa Vanderpump, who said that she wasn't coming back the day before not taping the reunion. Like, this is like that. Oh, I'm quitting you. Finch, here's the irony. She returned to Arizona, where she checked herself into the same mental health facility where she and Byer first met. Over 6 months later, she publicly admitted to lying about her cancer diagnosis in an in-depth interview with the Ankler. And I do have some quotes about that, which I am going to talk about. But the other thing I want to say before I move on is that the other really awful thing that happened here is that Jen had to have court-ordered therapy to get custody of her children back, because what I didn't mention at the beginning of this, which I probably should have, but Jen lost custody of her kids due to having a dissociative episode, which here's what I want to say about that is that women who have mental health issues are treated so horribly. While what happened, it was a dissociative episode and her children, there was a safety issue. Okay. But her children were sent to foster care and put into the children and youth system. And she had to go and get treatment, and she had to work so hard to get them back. And I just want to say that I think this court system can be a blood-soaked nightmare for women who are abused, because there's so much blaming and shaming about, well, you dissociated. Well, do you understand dissociating is a symptom of very severe, complex PTSD that is through no fault of someone's own. It is very scary, and it is significant of a real underlying issue. So, which she got treated. And so my point is that the system loves to gaslight women. And by the way, women who have mental health issues, if they die or something happens to them, it's always like, oh, well, that bitch is crazy. Well, she just probably walked away and left her kids. And so I just want to be a voice to say that all of that rhetoric is bullshit. Okay? Bullshit. And if this is resonating with you and this has happened to you, please know I support you. You're not crazy. And I could talk about this for days. But the real shitty thing here is that Jen had this therapist who, her name was Carly, and this therapist decides to drop Jen and take on Finch. And I just want to say that the unethical, it's not even just unethical. It's just all sorts of wrong. There are reasons why one therapist may or may not see two people in a couple. So for example, me as a therapist, I would not see two people for individual and couple sessions because there is a conflict of interest. Typically, there is one person who's the client, and then you can do marital or family sessions with the spouse, but it's usually recommended that the spouse gets their own therapy for reasons just like this. So this awful therapist, who, yes, I'm going to call her awful, completely dumped Jen, completely dumped her to take on Finch. And again, Finch's manipulation knows no bounds. And unfortunately, there are terrible professionals in this space who allow themselves to be manipulated or who are sick themselves and who get themselves into these really gross dynamics with clients. For example, I saw on Dateline, there was this woman going to trial for potentially murdering her husband, and she lived with a therapist for 8 months. What? No. No, boundaries, like people do not understand. Helpers need to have boundaries too. We can't help people out of a hole if we're in it with them, if we're blinded by our own stuff, if we're blinded by our own love for them or whatever it is. I mean, it's just so insane. There are reasons for these boundaries. So this therapist literally dumps Jen. This woman has gone through it and then chose Finch. And I'm like, well, I hope you're both awful and happy together. And of course, this therapist ended up leaving this mental health facility. And I'm sure they're happily practicing somewhere in Arizona. So here's what Finch had to say. I'm going to give snippets from this article. I know it's absolutely wrong what I did, she said. I lied and there's no excuse for it, but there's context for it. The best way I can explain it is when you experience a level of trauma, a lot of people adopt a maladaptive coping mechanism, she added. Some people cut, I lied. This was my coping and my way to feel safe and seen and heard. Okay, here's why this is the biggest bag of bullshit I've ever heard in my life. Okay, what trauma? What trauma are we talking about? Because this pathological liar is still trying to claim that she has real trauma. But what we know to be true is that when Finch's parents came to this treatment facility, they had no idea that she had cancer because she didn't, right? So they found out then that she claimed she had cancer. And she said that her brother was abusive growing up and they were both like, where? What? How? So that's red flags too, right? It is possible to live in a family system where the individuals in the system see things differently, right? It is possible for someone to be abused and for adults to say, well, I didn't see that, or I didn't hear this, or that's not true. That did not seem like what this situation was. This situation was these people who went there, were ambushed with all of these tragedies, and they were like, none of this ever happened. So my point is that she is still trying to weaponize mental health. I'm going to explain what I believe it is, but there's no trauma. This is an offense to people who are self-injurers, who are, who use substances to cope. This is not addiction. This is a personality issue, and this is pathological lying. And to prove what I'm saying, She lacks any and all self-awareness because she claims that, it's been a very quiet and sad time. I really miss my fellow writers. It's like a family. And she says she hasn't returned to television writing, but remained optimistic about rebuilding her old career, saying, I could only hope that the work I've done will allow me back into those relationships. What work? What work have you done? Doing an article saying that, yes, you faked cancer, that, yes, the quote was, the truth is, she said, there's no excuse, no justification. Nothing will ever make my lies to anyone okay. Nothing erases the trauma I caused, the fear, the pain, the anger, the tears, the time. And nothing matters more to me than holding myself accountable in every way. I will continue to repair whatever damage I can and ensure I am not the worst things I've done. I recognize of all of this will take time for people to believe. I will work and wait as long as it takes. And regarding cancer, she did admit outright, she said, I've never had any form of cancer, she admitted. I told a lie when I was 34 years old, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger and got buried deeper and deeper inside me. Okay, so let me be clear. This is all deflection. It's all blaming because she didn't tell one lie. She told like a million lies. And each of those lies had legs and things breaking out. Like each lie led to other lies, and it was like a Venn diagram. It's just all lies. So it wasn't one bad lie when she was 34. It started in 2007 and it continued, and it was about a ton of different things that I just explained. So now let me get to what on earth do I think is going on here psychologically. Okay, I'm going to explain my theories and explain some of the psychiatric issues here at play. I'm going to describe malingering and factitious disorder. I talked about factitious disorder when it came to Gypsy Rose and her mother. So malingering is the intentional fabrication of medical symptoms for the purpose of external gain, okay? Factitious disorder is the intentional creation or exaggeration of symptoms, but without concrete benefit. So factitious disorder is a mental illness classified as somatic symptom disorder. People with this disorder lie about having medical or psychiatric symptoms, and there's two kinds. There's factitious disorder imposed on self, which is when an adult lies about their own medical issues, and then there is factitious disorder imposed on another, which was previously known as Munchausen syndrome by proxy, which is where an adult acts it out on a child or on somebody else that they're caring for, usually a child. So previously, factitious disorder was Munchausen syndrome. And the reason why it changed is that factitious disorder was named after this guy named Baron Munchausen, who was a man known to be a narrator of false and exaggerated tales. So quite simply, the new name is more accurate and more specific. And, with psychology, they're always trying to do better once they know better. And it's just not a good look to have something named after some guy who told tall tales. That's not great. So factitious disorder is a mental health condition with no clear cause, while malingerers do it for personal gain. They have clear external motivators that drive their behavior, such as insurance fraud, other forms of financial gain, getting opportunities at work. Sound familiar? So the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5, does not list pathological lying as a separate diagnosis, but it is mentioned as a symptom of factitious disorder, and it is also recognized as a symptom of antisocial, narcissistic, borderline, and histrionic personality disorders. So pathological lying is a well-established concept in psychology and is associated with disordered thinking patterns and beliefs. It can manifest over years or even a lifetime, and some signs include contradictory stories, unverifiable details, and overly dramatic or long stories. Various hypotheses have been suggested to explain pathological lying. For instance, lie telling becomes so habituated it turns into a natural response, and the liar no longer distinguishes on a conscious level between what is true and what is false. Other contributing factors may include social and cognitive immaturity, maladaptive problem-solving strategies, and a strategy to perpetuate antisocial behavior. So antisocial behavior and antisocial personality disorder is what you would traditionally call a sociopath, a psychopath. So sociopathy and psychopathy are just different names for antisocial personality disorder. In a study published in the British Journal of Psychiatry, they investigated white matter volumes at the level of 4 prefrontal subregions via structural MRIs in 10 pathological liars, 14 antisocial controls, so 14 people who were diagnosed as antisocial as controls, and 20 people without any diagnoses as quote unquote normal controls. They found that liars demonstrated a relatively widespread increase in white matter versus antisocial and normal controls. So higher levels of white matter may predispose some individuals to pathological lying per the authors. So although there is no formal treatment for pathological lying, counseling or psychotherapy can help the person understand how their lying impacts others. However, there is a lot of mixed research about, does therapy help or worsen antisocial personality disorder? People who have antisocial personality disorder, they do not have empathy. Like, that's the cornerstone of this diagnosis, just not being able to feel empathy. And if you're not feeling empathy, then it allows you to do a lot of low down dirty things because, quite frankly, you don't care about it. I would break out in flop sweat. I would never sleep for the rest of my life. But for some people, they are missing that. They don't have that. And antisocial personality disorder also contains symptoms of kind of like conduct issues, acting out behavior, criminal behavior, breaking laws and not adhering to rules and regulations because they think that they are special or different somehow. But there's also research that shows that therapy with someone with antisocial personality disorder who is a predator, it just sharpens their skills. Because if you have someone with this disorder, have a therapist, unlike me, who is able to, again, growing up with someone with this personality type, I get a feeling in my body. I know when it's happening. I know what it is. I know how to not be manipulated, but that is the exception and not the rule. And so my other theory here, in addition to malingering and an antisocial personality disorder, there's something called histrionic personality disorder, which is a cluster B personality disorder, meaning it involves dramatic and erratic behavior. It usually develops in late adolescence or early adulthood. It causes people to act in dramatic and attention-seeking ways. The word histrionic means dramatic or theatrical. People with histrionic personality disorder may feel underappreciated or depressed when they're not the center of attention. 2, have rapidly shifting and shallow emotions. 3, be dramatic and extremely emotionally expressive. 4, have a larger than life presence. 5, be persistently charming and flirtatious. 6, speak dramatically and express strong opinions, but with few facts or details to support their opinions. Thinking that their relationships with others are closer than they usually are. Having difficulty maintaining relationships, often seeming fake or shallow in their interactions with others. Needing instant gratification or becoming bored or frustrated easily, and constantly seeking reassurance or approval. People with histrionic personality disorder may not realize how their behavior and way of thinking can be problematic. They may believe the other person is the problem or that they haven't found the right friends or romantic partner yet. There's no cure, but a medical professional can help manage symptoms through psychotherapy or other treatments. Okay, so what is it that I'm saying here? Elizabeth Finch lied for 12 years. That's 4,383 days, 105,192 hours. This woman lied to friends, family, coworkers, got opportunities, kept the lies going for 4,383 days. And in this Ankler interview, her lack of accountability is astounding. And it tells you that while she says, yes, I faked this, she still believes that she is worthy of redemption. Elizabeth Finch made a choice day in and day out. For all that time, she co-opted other people's stories. She was a grief tourist. She was an energy vampire. And she claimed for 2 years after being found out by the love of her life that she would be honest. And it was not until her wife exposed her that now she takes accountability, kind of. Still saying, I still hope that there's redemption here. I still hope that, maybe I can ride on the Handmaid's Tale. Comparing herself to someone with self-injurious behavior, PTSD, or real trauma, comparing herself to an addict is an insult. It's all an insult. Elizabeth Finch is an insufferable, pathological liar who used stolen valor to receive ill-gotten gains, to perpetuate her career. She walked into Jen Byer's life, walked into her kids' lives, and just didn't care who she hurt in the process. She helped raise these children, and now she, again, has left their life. She is just, in my opinion, she is just like every other predator in Hollywood, except she's a woman. And misogyny lets female predators off the hook time and time again. So this is a reminder. Women can be predators. They can be dangerous. And in my opinion, Elizabeth Finch is the definition of it all. At the end of the day, Elizabeth Finch wanted to be somebody. She wanted to be important. And, sometimes people will use whatever they have to use to get them to where they need to be. And I hope you have all enjoyed this. This is a heck of a season 3 finale for me. I cannot wait to come back for season 4 fresh with my clinical interpretations, my hot takes, my signature sass. And I hope you all have a wonderful time. And I look forward very much to talking to you all again. So for me, for the end of season 3, I will say, take care of yourselves and each other, and ta-ta for now. Until season 4. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Abish therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or are here on YBT Podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.